Good morning, I'm Alana Bobbitt, co-president of African Americans Changing Tomorrow.
And I'm Nia Daniels, co-president of African American Changing Tomorrow. On behalf of Dr. Smith, Ms. Shekel, Social Studies Department Chair, and the other members of African American Changing Tomorrow, we welcome you to Black History Month.
We wanted to start the month with an overview of Black History Month's founder, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, and the significant interconnectedness of Black history and American history.
Please check your email later today to review opportunities to deepen your knowledge of the significant contributions of African Americans. Thank you.
Black History Month is a time to recognize the cultural and historical contributions of African Americans in this country. But how did Black History Month start? Here's the story about a man who's known as the father of Black history. Dr. Carter G. Woodson was born in Virginia in 1875 to former slaves. He became an accomplished scholar, prolific author, and a visionary. He created what we now celebrate as Negro History Month to right what he saw as the unacceptable wrong, the glaring omission of a formalized Negro history.
There was a time following slavery when society had developed a racial worldview, if you will, that African Americans did not possess a history and culture. And this view, therefore, distorted a lot of the conceptions of what the Black race was in terms of their capabilities and talents and everything that they might have offered to American history.
In 1926, Dr. Woodson started Negro History Week in February, an observance which would later be expanded to a month.
Now, the misnomer is that because it's the shortest month of the year, it must have been given to us. Actually, Woodson chose this month because it was the month for the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, February 12th and February 14th, respectively.
Dr. Woodson founded what is now known as the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Dr. Deidre Foreman is the president of the association's Manhattan branch, and she says Woodson's goals went far beyond documenting Black heritage.
He and others noticed that there was a significant disparity in the educational system in the United States.
Carter Woodson overcame that disparity and in 1912 became the second Black person to earn a Ph.D. from Harvard University and the first whose parents were slaves. Woodson's most well-known book, The Miseducation of the Negro, is still studied in classrooms. First published in 1933, it examines the failures of how Black people were taught and how Blacks were conditioned to be less, to be subservient.
Woodson became a strong proponent for educating the masses, specifically the white population, due to the discrimination and racist atrocities that have been taking place.
Dominique Jean-Louis is the assistant curator of history exhibitions at the New York Historical Society.
So much of what Carter G. Woodson wanted to do was really examine closely what we're taught in schools and how that affects our mindsets moving forward. And so I think museums can be another way to do that.
The Historical Society's landmark exhibitions have included a three-part exhibit called Slavery in New York and Works of the Harlem Renaissance. Jean-Louis says cultural institutions are vital to preserve and further the legacy of the history and culture of African Americans.
Carter G. Woodson is kind of part of this cadre of thinkers, scholars, intellectuals who are really pushing the boundaries of what it means to theorize African American life and what it means to celebrate the history that had happened up until that point. So his connection to Harlem and to New York is really an intellectual one, as well as a social one.
Arturo Alfonso Schomburg was a Woodson contemporary and a passionate contributor to the Harlem Renaissance. His vast personal collection of documenting Black history established what we know as the New York Public Library's Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture.
I think what Carter G. Woodson and what Schomburg did, and kind of all of these early advocates of Black history and Black scholarship did, was really lay the groundwork for some of these future Black studies departments and make it acceptable to study yourself.
Joy Bivens is the Associate Director of Collections and Information Services at the Schomburg Center, which is recognized worldwide for its vast collection.
You know, at the Schomburg, Black History Month is every month. We do this all the time, right? And the riches and unbelievable and undeniable contributions that Black people have made to world history are represented in our collections, are represented through the books that we have, represented through our programs. So I would say that Carter G. Woodson, Negro History Week, all of these were outgrowths of an explosion of interest, of the knowledge that this information needed to be out there, and it needed to be promoted as widely to Black people as possible.
Dr. Woodson died in 1950. President Gerald Ford proclaimed February Black History Month 26 years later, the observance addressing centuries of oppression, systemic racism, and celebrating African Americans' countless contributions to art and culture.
Black history is American history, and American history is Black history. You can't have one without the other.
Dr. Dwight McBride became president of the New School 9 months ago, bringing a deep academic resume of African American studies.
And if you're going to tell a story of America and leave out Black people, it's going to be a very incomplete, not to mention unsatisfying and dishonest story.
He says he's fortunate to lead the university, especially now, after the brutal deaths of George Floyd and other African Americans, and the massive protests and civil unrest. This awakening for American society, Dr. McBride says, is a critical opportunity.
I think Black history, the study of it and the way it happens, not only in schools, but in churches, but now in municipalities, right, in states, in organizations, in corporations. I think that's critically important to creating a more inclusive world, because every successive generation always has the fear, right, I think, of losing or forgetting that the importance of our history. And we've seen, if nothing else, we've seen in recent years what can happen when we neglect and forget our history, right? How dangerous that can be.
One of Dr. Carter G. Woodson's noted supporters was civil rights activist and historian W.E.B. Du Bois. Now, as I said in the story, Dr. Woodson was the second African American to earn a Ph.D. from Harvard. Du Bois was the first.